Thank you. I decided to sit because I want to engage with you in this conversation. So I'd like to ask you if you could close your eyes for a moment and think about a situation that I'm going to tell you. Imagine that a bomb explodes in the area of reception in which you were just recently. What would you do? You may open your eyes, and maybe during the time of the dialogue, you can share with us what your thoughts were. But let me tell you what I did. I run. I literally run. After a bomb went off in the building of the Association of Students, where I was very active in the community. I grew up in a country at war, and so I consider myself a child of war. For many years, I observed decapitated bodies at the age of 9 when I was coming back from the beach. I saw those kinds of situations also when I was coming back from the school. The father of my baby daughter at the time suffered the same fate. For all the Salvadorian families that are either in El Salvador or around the world, we have at least one member of our family who has been killed or disappeared. In fact, over 75,000 Salvadorians were killed during the Civil War that lasted for 26 years during the 70s and the 80s. So for me to come and tell you this story hasn't been easy, because I haven't remembered for many years. And one previous speaker talked about how trauma is there and stays there for many years. But for me, it's been the opportunity to actually connect my experience with that of the unaccompanied minor who are crossing the border. Before I do that, let me just explain the picture of being at home and living that violence. But on the route, it wasn't easy for me. I traveled with my baby to the US and sought refuge there because I had family there. But on the way, I was literally not forced, but I was required, which is pretty much the same, to give my baby daughter, who I was breastfeeding at the time, to the female coyotes. Coyotes are smugglers that traffic people across the borders. And she was able to make it through the US, but I wasn't. She was passed in a car with the documentation of a Mexican child. I was detained in the border, but just before that, I had been sexually assaulted by a male coyote. I didn't know how to swim at the time. I do now better. But I had to cross the river, and that was a difficult thing to do. But it was a necessary thing to do, because there was no choice. So luckily, I say now, I was detained by the immigration and deported. to El Salvador, but desperate out of the need to rejoin with my daughter. After 3 months, I was able to do so. This time, traveling by car on the floor of the car. So this is not a rare story that you will hear. This is the stories, and even worse, of the unaccompanied minor who are crossing the US-Mexican border. The United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees actually did investigate if these children are in need of protection and why they're fleeing. So they interviewed about 404 children who have been detained in the border, and they interviewed Maritza, who is only 15 years old at the time of the interview in 2013. And her uncle asked her to leave El Salvador because she was a gang had a crush on her. And that actually meant that he could come at any time and pick her up. And she knew better that girls were being raped and dismembered, put in a plastic bag, and thrown in the street. So for her and for her uncle was a matter of life and death. And she said, just leave. Kevin, who was 17 years old at the time of the interview, had a similar story. His grandmother asked him to leave because he was also being asked to join the gangs. So his grandmother said, if you join the gangs, we'll shoot you. If you don't join, then another rival gang is going to shoot you, or the police is going to shoot you. In any case, you're going to be killed. So it's better that you just leave so they don't shoot you. So these stories are actually an important one to keep in mind as we try to understand what is happening with those children. But this study I mentioned actually concluded that these children need protection because what they're fleeing is violence. They're fleeing and trying to escape from, also in some cases, child abuse, and in other cases, human trafficking. However, this kind of protection has not been granted to them. In the United States, it's actually not granted, even if the US has the power to do so. There's an executive order that grants powers to the president to be able to declare refugee status to this group. But he has to do it by October 1st. It doesn't seem like he will, because recently he declared that he was going to wait until the elections to take action on immigration issues. In fact, humanitarian aid is still stuck in Congress, and needed services are not funded at this point, and it's been taken away from other refugees to attend this situation. Judge Marks, who is the president of the National Association of Immigrant Judges, recently declared in a press conference that they are dealing with cases of life and death. And she characterizes as penalty cases, death penalty cases. Because what it is at stake is actually whether at removal or in deportation, these children will be able to be safe. We heard reports that youth, minors in Honduras, upon return in San Pedro Sula, have actually been found in the morgue, death, and more likely by gang violence. So the question to you is today, will you remember these stories that you heard here? Would you remember them tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after? Because they're gonna keep on coming, and more stories are building up. Facts and figures are very, very important. And we heard the speaker earlier, how important data is. But I came to tell you that it's not enough. We get the big picture about what is happening with data, but we may lose the depth of that picture. So pay attention to the stories that you're hearing today, and seek for other stories. Connected with data can give you a better sense of the situation that, in this particular case, the unaccompanied minor are actually going through. But I came here also to tell you that although it seems like the things have not improved a lot since the Convention of Human Rights, and the Convention on the Rights of Children, and all of the other conventions that constitute that human rights framework, there is still hope. And to me, the hope is in the responsibility we have as citizens to make such conventions a reality. Because it seems sometimes that it is only governments that go and negotiate and make these conventions, and they are the ones responsible. Yes, they have a responsibility. But we as citizens, whether we are here in The Hague or in the US, we have the responsibility to make these conventions a reality. That responsibility to protect children is not only in the hands of desperate mothers, such as I was. It's not in the hands of desperate communities who have to blockade the entrance of their communities in order to keep away those who are stealing children, like was in the case of Guatemala, which I researched. But the responsibility is also in each one of us here today, because we have the power to hold our government accountable for what they do here at home, for what they do abroad. And providing support and all of that to governments that are violating human rights and not doing what they have to do, it's can be also part of that complicity. So how do we engage as global citizens, as engaged citizens? And this is an important question, and one that I think we'll probably not answer here, and but back home, I hope you continue to wonder about it. Of course, social action, social activism, advocacy work is very important. But it's also important to take into consideration things like the Convention on the Rights of Children, that acknowledges the right to food, to shelter, to personal safety, to cultural heritage. And put those conventions at the center of our lives. That's what I do every day. And that's what I hear. I'm here to talk to you. So, the last question is, how committed are you to do such a thing? To hold the values, to hold the principles of these conventions at the center of your lives. So I want to close down by asking you to close your eyes again. And just think about the possibility of a world where children who are vulnerable and who are most vulnerable, who deserve protection, are able to obtain it. Thank you for having me.